This Sunday, we're talking about somebody who I think is the most overlooked a lot of times, but also the one that I relate to the most. And I actually brought a little illustration with me. I actually got it from Mari. Thank you as well. But you guys have these figurines. You know what I'm talking about? The nativity scene. Can you guys see them from over there? The little nativity scene, and it was so funny because we were setting them up with, what's your name? Max was helping me set them up, and we were trying to figure out, like, who's who, right? So you're always looking at this, and you're like, all right, well, you know Jesus, right? You always know Jesus. You got the sheep. You got Mary. And then after that, it gets a little strange because you've got, okay, like this guy is probably a wise man because he's got a pointy hat, and this guy's dressed funny. And then you got probably the shepherd, and then you're not sure who this guy is because is he like a shepherd? Is he with the wise men? He's carrying a lantern. Is that like one of the gifts? And so he's the one that's always left over. And by process of elimination, you're like, all right, this is the extra guy, so it must be Joseph, right? And we always kind of have him there as the extra guy, always kind of mixed in with the shepherds. You never see Joseph like those paintings from way back, the 15th century, 16th, 17th century paintings, and you never see Joseph like holding baby Jesus, right? You never see Joseph with the baby. You never really see him in any of the paintings other than kind of to the side, over by the hay and the donkeys and the ox, like that's where you belong, with the animals. And he's never really featured prominently, and yet, to be honest, this is the guy that I relate to the most. Out of the whole story, I think, man, this is the guy, like he's nothing special. He was just a regular guy. He wasn't John the Baptist in the wilderness. He wasn't the wise man that was super wealthy and had camels and came. He wasn't bearing the baby. Like, he wasn't the pregnant one. He was just a guy. And I think that speaks to me so much because a simple guy out of Nazareth had a role to play in the coming of God to this world. And so if you could, we're going to turn to our Bibles, Matthew chapter 1. If you have a Bible, turn to Matthew chapter 1. If you have one of those Gideon's Bibles, it's going to be your first book, right? That's why they give them out for free, because they're missing half the books. If you have a full Bible, it's going to be 3/4 of the way in. Matthew chapter 1. My goal today is we're going to look at Joseph as the chosen protector, provider, and adopter. If you could, next slide, please. Chosen to be... And we're missing some of Joseph. Chosen to be a protector, provider, and adopter. And we'll look at all of those in sequence. And so, video team, if you could help me out with this. But we'll begin with this first. Next slide. Joseph was the protector. And he was, first of all, the protector of his righteousness. So like I said, in Matthew chapter 1, let's begin with verse 18. Verse 18, read it with me now. Now, the birth of Jesus Christ took place in this way. When his mother Mary had been betrothed to Joseph, before they came together, she was found to be with child from the Holy Spirit. And her husband, Joseph, being a just, righteous man, I inserted that, unwilling to put her to shame, resolved to divorce her quietly. The word that is used here in the Greek is dikaios, meaning righteous. It says just. I wanted to clarify that and make sure we really understood what is meant by that. It means righteous in terms of righteous in front of God's law, just like Zechariah and Elizabeth. This was a man that protected his reputation, that protected his righteousness before people and before God. And so let's take a lesson out of this early on, because there are young men here today that are saying, hey, I think I'm ready to start a family. Maybe soon. Maybe you're already engaged even. And the question we always have to ask ourselves, and I have to ask us as young men, ladies as well, you'll hear more about that on Mary, I'm sure, but especially young men, can we describe you in this way? Do you fight? Do you protect your righteousness before God and men? Before men, the reputation of, man, this is somebody that's on fire, but before God as well. Have you dealt with the sin in your life? Have you overcome the major issues? If not, are you with a mentor? Are you with a pastor, somebody that can help you with that? There was when I was single, I had like this elaborate theory on dating. It was awesome. And part of it was this: be who you want to be with. You can write it down. Pete back in the day. Be who you want to be with. And this was Joseph. Because he was going to marry this beautiful girl who was pure and honest and righteous before the Lord, he was also righteous. If you want to marry a fun girl, you're going to have to be fun, all right? If your jokes are flat, she's not going to laugh. She's not going to be that's the reality of it, right? You're going to attract kind of who you are, right? If you're an interesting person, she'll be an interesting person. If you want a smart girl, don't do stupid things, all right? Just simple things, right? But if you want somebody who is righteous and pure before the Lord, man, you're going to have to fight for that, guys. You're going to have to fight for that in your life. Because you're going to be with somebody, you're going to be who you want to be with. You must become that person. Let's continue on. What else did Joseph protect? He protected his own righteousness. He also protected his spouse's reputation. He protected his spouse's reputation. And again, this is for men and women. We've both got to protect each other's reputation. But specifically in Joseph's case, we can read Matthew 1:24 as we continue to read through the story. When Joseph woke from sleep, he did as the angel of the Lord commanded him. He took his wife, and he knew her not until she had given birth to a son, and he called his name Jesus. So you can imagine the story here. Joseph is visited by Mary one morning and said, hey, here's the situation. The angel came, this, that, the other thing. I'm pregnant. And you can imagine Joseph, I don't know how much of that he believed at that time. But in his mind, he was going to say, I'm not going to believe that, but I don't want to treat you poorly. I'm going to let you go. Let's talk about the Jewish custom here. I want to just open the door for you a little bit about what would have happened. It was the Jewish tradition of what was called kiddushin, which was their betrothed tradition. And it went like this. A couple, you guys would fall in love, and you would get legally married. You would get legally married. This was exactly how it was. We took a picture of Joseph and Mary. But you would get legally married, but then you could not be intimate. You could not live together for a whole year. Yay! Right? Who's excited? But it was for a purpose. Because in those days, a lot of the marriages were arranged, right? The dad would come and he would say, hey, this is a good girl for my son. The parents would get together, and the groom's father would pay a dowry. You would pay a sum of money, land, sheep, whatever that might be, to the bride's father. And so, men, if you have fathers, if you have girls in your house, it was a very profitable situation you would be in today, right? You're like, hey, they're all good-looking young ladies. I can get a car like a Lexus, Beamer. That's the way it was back in the day. But the reason they did that was for two reasons. One, on the side of the groom, he wouldn't get cold feet in a year. And on the side of the bride, they had that year of purity, of distance, to make sure that she was pure. They didn't want her to turn up pregnant like it happened in this story. And so now Joseph is in an awkward position because, man, there's a dowry that's been paid. We're in an engagement. We've been waiting this year, and Mary turns up pregnant. What do we do here? This is exactly what we were trying to avoid. And Joseph, being the righteous man here, he says, well, what we're going to do, I'm going to treat her with respect. I'm going to treat her with grace. I'm going to protect my own reputation, but I also don't want to put the implication of maybe even criminal justice and having her be before a court, before a religious court. He said, I'm going to quietly let her go. I'm going to try to protect both of our reputations. But then the angel shows up. The angel shows up and he explains it to them, and he's in a different position now, where now he has to put his reputation on the line. This is a tough time for Mary. You can imagine that as this kind of gets out, people are going to be looking back at her. They're going to pull up their yearbook pictures and say, oh, Mary, oh, it's that girl. Oh, she was betrothed to Joseph, you know, and she got pregnant. And it's just, we thought she was such a good girl, and look at her. And Joseph has to enter into that situation. He loves her, absolutely. Man, he's hurt. I know how I mean, can you imagine, men, you know, you're engaged, and then she comes to you a couple of days before your wedding and says, oh, by the way, I'm pregnant. And you're just like, well, that wasn't me. What do you do? And Joseph has to come into that situation because he's also had this dream, right? And he just doesn't brush it off, but he accepts it as from the Lord, and he has to put his reputation on the line and protect and take this girl in and love on her. Because in that time, being unfaithful outside, being a cheater, so meaning if she would have slept with somebody else other than Joseph, that was very bad. It was less bad because now it looked like, oh, Joseph is marrying her because it is his child. They must have slept together when they shouldn't have. And so he's coming in and taking the blame, the responsibility for that, and putting his reputation on the line and trying to protect her in that situation as well. I want to take a little bit of application for us here before we go. I was talking to a young man last year, and he had a past. He's been through some things, and he says everyone in church knew what I was into, and there was drugs and just hanging out with the wrong crowd. Goes to prison, gets saved, comes back, and he says, the Lord changed my life. I'm a new man now. He's on fire for God, but that reputation was still there. And he says, I couldn't do enough to prove to people that I was a different person. Luckily, he said, it was very tough to date, but luckily this one young lady that I had affection for, she understood, she saw my heart. We got the blessing from the pastors and the parents, and he's married now, he's happy, but he says there was a lot of pain there. Because we as people are not quick to forgive, to forget, to restore as God is. And for us, it's got to be so much more important. Where God restores, we've got to find God's restoration in these stories. Where God comes in, there will be, Joseph is marrying a single mom at this point. But that's a situation that God had to step in. I think even Pastor Mark had a tweet. He says, single men, don't overlook the single moms. Jesus' mom was a single mom. It went pretty well for Joseph. If you take that in the right context, again, one where God is involved and redeem that situation. And there are single dads and moms in this church family and in others that where God has stepped in and redeemed them from maybe there was sin in the past. However that all happened, their fault or not their fault, God comes in and restores families today. And we participate in that process by accepting and loving on folks like that and understanding where God is involved, all things is made new and beautiful. And that is where men step in and say, I will offer my protection and my reputation. Or the vice versa, where the woman says, I will, but we must seek God in these situations. The last piece that he protected was he protected the family. Matthew 2:13. Now when they had departed, and behold, an angel of the Lord appeared to Joseph in a dream, said, Rise, take the child and his mother, flee to Egypt, and remain there until I tell you, for Herod is about to search for the child to destroy him. And he rose and took the child and his mother by night and departed to Egypt and remained there until the death of Herod. Sometimes you have to move neighborhoods. When the fireworks outside happen in December, those aren't fireworks. It's gunshots. I've had the opportunity to manage some property back in the day, and when they call you at 2 a.m. and say there's been a drive-through, and you're a single mom with a child, you need to get out, right? There's situations when you're in a bad neighborhood. But I also want to bring this to us men again, but as families, as parents. Sometimes you've got to protect your family and move as well. I know of families where their kids got mixed up with the wrong crowd. Man, they can see that this is leading them into a life of gang or just criminal activity or drug abuse or alcoholism, whatever that might be. Maybe they're in the crowd where they're just becoming secularized completely, and you're looking at your little girl, and every day she becomes more disobedient and more in tune with her friends and everything that is wrong and the party scene and all that is filthy before the Lord. And you think, what have I done to deserve this? What have we done? Where have we messed up? And I've heard of families that said, hey, we're going to move our family. We're going to go to a different neighborhood, a different city, a different state, a different country even. There have been folks that said, we're taking our son, our family, our kids, and we're going to go on a short-term mission trip for 6 months, and we're going to live somewhere else to save this kid's life, to redeem this from all that he's been chained up with. We're going to make that move. That's a bold move, folks. But man, what would you not sacrifice for the soul of your children? This wasn't ideal for Joseph. Joseph had a business to shut down. He had to leave work. He had to move to a different country where there was a different language. He had to go find work there, live there for a couple of years. Like if I told you had to move to Mexico for a couple of years, like who's in? Nobody's in, right? You got to drink the water, that's got bad consequences. And but that's what he does. He's there. He just doesn't send them away. Hey, why don't you guys go live with Elizabeth and Zechariah in Judea? He does what he needs to do. And so he protects the family. He does what is needed to protect the family. Joseph has the role of the protector. God also chose Joseph not only to protect, but also to provide. And again, this is an example for us. He was a provider of necessities. We're going to switch books now. If you're still with me in the Bible, we're going to turn to Luke, and we're going to go to Luke chapter 2 and read with me now from verse 4. Luke chapter 2, verse 4, as we kind of look at a different angle of Joseph. And Joseph also went up from Galilee, from the town of Nazareth to Judea, to the city of David, which is called Bethlehem, because he was of the house and of lineage of David, to be registered with Mary, his betrothed, who was with child. And while they were there, the time came for her to give birth, and she gave birth to her firstborn son, and wrapped him in swaddling clothes, and laid him in a manger, because there was no place for them in the inn. Joseph was the provider of necessities. Now, they had a home and work and all of that in Nazareth. They're in a different part of the country now, right? You just went from Nazareth, which was kind of north, think like it was more rural, so Alabama, something like that. And they're going down to the city life. They just traveled closer to Washington, D.C., right, to the capital. And they're in a strange new place. The prices are different, Everybody's charging $5 a gallon. It's crazy for the fuel. And they're trying to find a hotel, and all the hotels are booked out. And folks, if he were a wealthy individual, he could have bought a room. He could have said, hey, dude, I'll buy your room. What's it going to take? He could have gotten a room. They don't have that kind of money, right? Like, no matter how much you try, you're not going to be able to get the room. But he does the second best thing. He's going to find some sort of roof to put over their head, some place to lay the baby, some way to take care of her. He's going to be resourceful, and he's going to take this young pregnant mom, and he's going to take care of her to the best of his abilities in that moment. He was called, he was chosen to provide. He was the dad, he was the father in that situation as a provider. There's a statistic, the U.S. Census Bureau, I think I've brought this up once before, 24 million children in the U.S., 1 out of 3, so 33% of the kids in the U.S. live without their biological father in the home. Consequently, they say there is a father factor in nearly all social ills facing America today. America is hurting for providers. America is hurting for men to be men, to step up and be providers. Like Joseph was chosen for that family, this nation is hurting. And not only this nation, this world today, it's an epidemic, is hurting for men that'll step into a home and provide and take care. Not only to be the provider, but protector, but also be the provider. And we're lazy sometimes. I know Anna will be sharing her day with me and all of the troubles and the stress. And there's a lot of emotion involved. And it's so easy for me, and I have the temptation to say, well, those are your problems. Like, you got into this, you get out of it, and learn a valuable lesson, and then come tell me about it. That's the temptation we get, right, men? Sometimes, women, you get that temptation with your kids, like, now go wash the floor and think about what you've done. But guys, we're not called to that. You know, he could have said, well, you got pregnant, you find a manger, you find a hotel room. He steps in and he takes care of her. He provides the necessities. And so, just as Joseph was chosen to be a provider, men, we are chosen to provide for our families. He not only provided the necessities, he provided job skills. Matthew 13:54. Coming to his hometown, he taught the people in their synagogue, and they were astonished, saying, "Where did this man get such wisdom and miraculous powers?" They asked, "Is this not the carpenter's son?" Mark 6:3. "Isn't this the carpenter, the son of Mary and the brother of James, Joseph, Judas, and Simon?" I'm going to blow your mind here for a second. You've always read it, and all the pictures show Jesus as the carpenter, right? Like with wood and stuff, right? So we were in Israel this past year. Guess how much wood there is in Israel? Not a lot. Practically everything in Israel is built out of stone and mud and bricks. There's not a lot of wood. And so if you go back to the Greek word here, it's called tekton. It actually means swinger of hammer. And we were actually in Nazareth, and there's a picture if you guys could. We were here. This wasn't my picture, but I found it. They recreated kind of Nazareth in the time of Jesus. And this is how the houses look like, by the way, right? So you don't have nice wood paneling and drywall, and it was all rock. And our tour guide explained to us, he says, hey, one is, carpenter is really not the most accurate translation of the word here. It could be a carpenter, but it's a swinger of hammer. And what Jesus' dad, what Joseph likely did, he was actually more likely to have worked with both wood and rock, and was more of a stonemason even than he was a carpenter. Fun fact, you guys didn't know this? Now you do. And in fact, Nazareth would have made sense for them to live in, because not far, literally a couple of kilometers away, there was a very large stone quarry that Herod, who was at that time the king, he was building a ton of cities, a ton of palaces. There was plenty of work for Joseph and then later Jesus, who was taught this trade, to work in. They had work that was a couple of miles away. They would walk to work in the mine, or work in one of the palaces, cutting the stone, shaping it, making it, whatever you have to do. I don't know what you do with stone, but you build with it. And that's what they would do. And so Joseph, as the father figure, didn't abandon Jesus. Oh, he's not my son. No, he took him and he raised him, and he passed along the family work to this child. He was chosen to be a provider of the job skills as well. And it was very interesting, guys. Jesus would later reference a stone masonry in his sermons. Luke chapter 20, the stone that the builders rejected has become the cornerstone. Jesus had an understanding of this construction business that he received even from his dad. Again, I want to leave this with a illustration and with a message and application for us as men. I remember when I was 16 years old, I think in Virginia at least, you could start working with a worker's permit like 15 and a half. And And my first job was construction. And that was about 2.5 years with my dad. And he first brought me on to this large apartment building construction. I learned how to cut wood, and they said, Pete, the golden rule of construction is 10 fingers, 10 toes, end of day. Don't lose any. So you learn these things, and he taught me the trade that he knew at that time. And then I remember this one project. We were building residential homes, and he took on a whole carpentry. We did framework, and he said, we're going to go do this, frame this house. And he said, it's just going to be you and I, and every once in a while we'll call in somebody for major things like roofing or whatnot. I was 16 years old, folks. If I could show you a picture, I was skinny and weak. Weaker than I am today. Yeah, weak. But he comes in and he takes me under his arm and he says, Pete, you and I are going to build this house together. It was one of the best summers of my life. I hated it then, but I look back on it now. And I remember this one specific instance when you're framing in the garage, and you know that there's this beam that you've got to put over the top of the garage that is, it's just massive. It's heavy. And there's no way, I'm like, I can't even lift my end. And so he's got me like just holding up like so it doesn't tip over, and he's lifting up each side and struggling and like getting hernia almost and doing all the hard work himself, but he was doing it to invest in me. He takes this project and works the hardest he's ever worked in his life and puts his health on the line because he wanted to be with me. He wanted to be with his son and love on me and teach me this trade and show me and raise me up to be a man. And he became the provider in that sense. And he sacrificed and he loved on me that summer. And men, that's what we're seeing here in Joseph, this guy that we keep forgetting about. Somebody that took this guy, this kid, and he was going to teach on him and love on him and show him how to do it right, to be good at his trade, to be able to support. When Joseph will pass away, they say right around when Jesus was 14 or 16, to be able to carry on the trade to care for Mary. He did that. And that is such an example for us as men as well. So Joseph was a provider of job skills, but he was also a provider of spiritual leadership. We go back to Luke chapter 2, verse 41. Now his parents went to Jerusalem every year at the feast of Passover, and when he was 12 years old, they went up according to custom. It's easy to think that, everybody in Israel went to Jerusalem every year. It's a custom. No big deal. The reality was, Israel at that time was similar to what it is today. Today, Israel is 70% secular. They don't care about God. They don't care about church. That's Jewish people, 70% secular. That time, I wouldn't be surprised if the statistics were the same. Not everybody went to Jerusalem. Not everybody took the trip down. In fact, I pulled up a Google Maps for you guys. Obviously, Joseph wouldn't have had it, but 31 hours of walking today. And they actually would cross Jordan, so it was even more. It was closer to 40 hours of walking. Who's down for that? And you're with a whole group of people. It was a week, sometimes 2 weeks, a commitment where you had to make that trip from up north in Nazareth and walk down to Jerusalem. But they would do it. No minivan, no nothing. He would take the family and he would say, we're going to church. We're going. And he could have had so many, folks, there's a reason we look around and we're like, well, Dan's not here this Sunday, and you call him up and he's like, yeah, but they moved the football game and I had to stay home and watch, or this, that, the other thing. We find so many reasons to not go to church today. We'll say, well, I don't want to be around those hypocrites, right? Joseph could have said that. I don't want to be around the hypocrites in Jerusalem. We'll just worship here in the synagogue in Nazareth. Well, I don't like the music in Jerusalem. They're so liberal down there. Or too conservative, whichever way you lean. I don't like the bands. I don't like the choirs, whatever. He could have found an excuse. But he makes that trip every year and sets an example to his family. This was a part of their family DNA. I remember my dad waking us up super early one morning. Sunday morning, it's Easter, those 8 a.m. services that we all love. Some of you guys do love them, but I'm not a morning person. If I can get into the shower without killing myself, it's a good morning for me. And I'm a kid, so it's even worse. And it's 7 a.m., 6:30, whatever. Hey, guys, get up. But usually it's like, all right, get up, let's go. This time it was like, hey, if you want to go, you can go, or you can stay. And I was smart enough to know that this was a trick. And so I was like, all right, I'm going. But not all of our kids, not all of my siblings were that smart. And so some of them chose to stay home that Sunday morning. And so I don't remember how many went, how many stayed, but we come back. And by that time, all the rest of the kids have woken up, and so our dad kind of gets us together, and he's like, all right, so you three that went, and he pulls out his wallet and like, you guys get $1 each. It was big money when you're in Virginia and poor immigrant family. That was big money. And then you two that slept in, you guys get nothing. And they're like, but we want $1. No, you guys get nothing. And he proceeds to teach us this lesson about the fact that when you're committed to the church, to the Lord, to serving, there are rewards down the road. The Lord takes care of you down the road. You take care of the Lord's business, he takes care of yours. And I remember that to this day, I don't know what I spent the $1 on, but that lesson was invaluable. And Joseph, you can see him teaching that lesson and living that lesson with his family of being the righteous man that teaches his family the importance of being in community and being in church and coming and participating in this family that we have here and not making excuses. And so he was a provider of spiritual leadership. He was a protector. He was a provider. But he was also an adopter. God chose Joseph for his role, just as he chose Mary for her role. He chose them both. Different ways he revealed himself to Joseph a little bit differently than to Mary later on. They had to have that awkward conversation first, and then he had to obey. But God chose Joseph for his role specifically, just as he chose Mary, just as he chose everybody else, he chose him specifically for this. I have a question for you. If God told you tonight in a dream, somehow God compels you and shows you that there is adoption in your future, that you need to adopt a child. There's going to be a child that is not your own that will come into your family, that will touch your family in some way, and you will need to become their father, perhaps their mother. You will become their family. This is a real question. If God told you to adopt, would you do it today? And you're saying, well, if God told me, absolutely. No, but what if it's just a dream? What if it's through me right now? If God told you to adopt, would you do it? Would you listen as Joseph did to adopt this baby boy and make him as your own? It didn't take a preacher. It didn't take a PowerPoint. It didn't take a powerful YouTube video. It was a dream. A dream that he knew was from the Lord, that spoke to him directly, that he had to act on. But folks, if it happened to me, honestly, I would have said, oh, that was the sushi. Oh, Anna's borscht from last night just didn't sit well with me. I guess that you would write it off. But he understands that God's will was in that. And God speaks to him, and he obeys, and he acts on it. And in fact, folks, Joseph became the second person in the world to believe in the virgin birth. The second person in the world to accept that and step forward in faith. And this is the guy we write off with the shepherds. Yet how important and how strong his faith was. He accepted into his life the one that the rest of the world will reject. He paid the price to be the father, moving his family, the reputation tarnished in front of people. He paid that price to be the father of Jesus, to be the husband of Mary. And because of his obedience and his faith, he adopted Christ into his family, and he was adopted into Christ's family. Because he brought God into his family, God accepts him into his family. I want to share with you two examples, not two examples, but even 2 points. These are going to be my last 2 points. And they are biblical. And you might not agree with it completely, but these are biblical truths. And so the first point is this: we are adopted, and so we adopt. Because we are adopted, we must also adopt. Psalm 68, 5, 6, he is the father of the fatherless, protector of widows, is God in his holy habitation. James 1:27, if you want to look at New Testament. Religion that is pure and undefiled before God the Father is this: to visit, to show love, as we say here at Bryte Church, to orphans and widows in their affliction. I want to take you back a little bit. This is from the writings of Seneca, a very famous and historically accurate Roman writer. And he talks about the Roman culture back in the day. Listen carefully now. This is a dark patch in the history of humanity, and one that reflects today so much. Because they didn't have Planned Parenthood back in the day, or an abortion clinic. Back in the times of Rome, if you didn't want your child, you would take him and just put him outside. You would drown them. You would put him on a pile of dirt. You would put him on a pile of dung with the waste. Rome was actually founded, they say, by these 2 brothers that were thrown out, that they were not wanted by their parents. They were born, maybe they were the wrong gender, maybe they had a cleft lip, maybe they were sick, maybe you just didn't want a baby because of some social issue. And what Romans did in that time, what people all over the world did, in fact, in that time, was they would take these babies and they would take them and throw them out. Now, there were other people that would go around, and every once in a while they'd collect these babies. They were slave traders. And the little girls that were put out, and sometimes the boys, they would collect them, and they would raise them up to live in sexual slavery. As an infant, as little girls, already abused all of their life. Man, can you see how Satan works in this world? Just when evil walks among us. They would take these kids and just sell them into slavery to be used, to be treated as dirt. In fact, that's what they were called. There was a name, a very common name in that time. They called them kopros, dung, fertilizer. And they would name these kids different variations of kopros. Oh, you're a kopros kid. They picked you up off the crap pile. And then in the first century, a quiet revolution happened in Rome. A quiet revolution, these people that were called, they were strange. They were called followers of the way. They were called followers of the way, and it was very strange because they forbade themselves from throwing these infants out. They didn't throw out kids that they didn't want. They didn't throw out kids into the streets. What was even more strange was these people believed in a single God. They believed in this new God to the Romans who was, they said, a father of the fatherless. And this God apparently told them to go out, and not only would they not throw out their own kids, they would pick up the kids in the streets, in the dung piles, in the garbage piles outside of the city. And they would bring them into their families and raise them as their own, no matter if they were sickly or weak or the wrong gender or just unwanted. They would raise them and they would rescue them and give them a life. Who were these people? Even Paul writes about it in Romans 8:15. We miss this all the time, but look at this. He says, "For you did not receive the spirit of slavery to fall back into fear, but you have received the spirit of adoption as sons." You weren't made as slaves. You weren't picked up to be sexually abused the rest of your life, to be worked to death on some galley ship. You were adopted into a family instead. You were rescued off that dung pile. Man, can you imagine that verse was so powerful to the Romans back then? You didn't deserve it, but somebody came and rescued you. You were not wanted, but now you are wanted. And so that's what believers did. Today there are 120,000 kids in the U.S. looking for adoption, millions around the globe, but 120,000 kids in the U.S. looking for adoption. There are 400,000 churches in the United States. If every third church adopted one child, not even family, but adopted one child, we would not need foster homes anymore in the United States. If Christians acted like the Christians in the first century, we could completely wipe out the adoption process in the United States. We could make a dent in this world. I wonder what kind of excuses Joseph could have made when the angel told him, "You're going to have to adopt this son into your family and make him your own." Family Outreach Ministries listed the top 4 reasons Christians don't adopt today. They said there's 4 reasons. The first one is ignorance. They don't know that this is the calling of Christians. They don't realize that they've been called to this. They don't know how to do it. They don't know of the need that surrounds them. The second reason was selfishness. Oh, another child will take away my free time. They will take time away from my career, from my friends. Third is finances. It can be expensive to adopt. That's true. Even though there are organizations that can step in and help, it can still be expensive, and it's expensive to raise a kid. And finally, fourth, it's fear. It's hard. What if I'm not ready? How can I love them if they're not my own child? Will I be able to love them? What if they grow up to be a bad child and it'll reflect poorly on me? I've heard stories of adopted kids growing up disobedient, and that it's tough to raise kids that are adopted. There's so much fear, and so believers today say, well, maybe it's not for me. Maybe when God says he's father of the fatherless, let him be the father of the fatherless. We'll just have our own little family. We won't go out of our comfort zone. I'm not saying it's the right thing for every single family. And it's maybe not the right time for every single family. But I do want to make a point here for us to consider it, to bring this to the Lord in prayer. Because Joseph was in the exact same position, and he could have used any one of those and said, I don't know who this kid's going to be. Why am I supposed to take care of this kid? He's not my DNA. He doesn't carry my name. He doesn't carry my genes. It's expensive to feed another mouth. It's going to be expensive to take care of this kid. What if he's not a nice child? What if it serves as a financial disservice to me? It did. I mean, yeah, Jesus was a great kid later on, but he had to move to Egypt because of this guy. His life was threatened. That wasn't an easy adoption. It wasn't all clear-cut and dry. How am I supposed to support him when I'm just a stonemason and I've got 4 other kids coming later on, maybe? He could have used any one of those excuses. And maybe he lived even the rest of his life as Jesus was growing up. Maybe doubt would creep into the back of his mind. Man, I adopted this kid, but who is he really? He didn't live long enough to see Jesus' ministry and all the miracles and the baptism and the feeding of the 5,000. He wasn't around for that. But he had to step out in faith for when he was around, to be the provider, to be the protector, to be the adopter of the Son of God in that moment, and to trust God that he would take care of him in taking care of this child. We are adopted, and so we must also adopt. Number 2, my final point is this: Joseph adopted as an example of God's adoption. Joseph adopted as an example of God's adoption. Out of all the people through all of time, it was Joseph that was chosen to adopt Christ, the Son of God. This guy, nothing special, blue-collar guy from Nazareth that stepped out in faith. He became God's father here on earth. He was ready to receive Christ into his heart and family. We are also called to receive Christ into our heart and into our families. The outcome, read John 1, verse 12. But to all who did receive him, who believed in his name, he gave the right to become children of God, who were born not of blood of the will of the flesh, nor of the will of man, but of God. We give the right to become the children of God. Folks, come with me now into the throne room of God. Come with me now and stand right now. God is here. When I stand before God, I realize very quickly that I was not an easy adoption into his family. I wasn't the model kid that comes into his family and, oh, look, golden boy. He's better than my own kids, the Jewish nation or whatever. Look at this guy. He's so much better. I wasn't that. When I think about my adoption in the eyes of God, I think about my rebellious heart and all I still have to fight with, and all in my life I still have to overcome. All the disobedience when I run away from home, quote unquote, when I don't treat my Lord with respect, when I bring disgrace to his name through my actions, man, I'm not an easy adoption. And you can look in the mirror right now for yourself. I'm not going to speak to you. But if we stand before God right now, none of you guys are going to raise your hand and say, oh, God, I'm sure you're glad you adopted me. I sure made you look good. None of us are an easy adoption. And as we stand before God and understand who we are, the only reply that we get still is this: I will be a father to you, and you shall be sons and daughters to me, 2 Corinthians 6:18. You would not want a son like me. You would not want us, if you were God, you would not want any of us. And God says, no, but I will be your father. I will adopt you. I will pick you up off that dung heap. I will take you and rescue you and love you like my own son. You will be my children. There was a TV show in 2013 called Parenthood, a couple that was adopting this kid called Victor. Each of the shows, days, I don't know what they're called, but anyway, each segment they would show this process as it went along, and finally, one of the last segments, they had this illustration, not this illustration, it was real life. Victor's running around playing with some of the other kids, and he knocks over an expensive lamp and breaks it. And obviously the mom runs in to see what the matter is, and Victor's standing there in defiance, and he says, hey, it was me, I'm sorry, I'll pay for it. I'll take care of it. I'll pay for it. And the mom, you can see she's trying to teach him what it means to be in a family, to give him that assurance that, man, you are my son. She says, Victor, you don't have to worry about it. You're in our family. In our family, we don't pay each other. We're a unit. I'll take care of it. And he says, Are you sure? Are you serious? She says, that's how families work. And you can see in the show just his face lights up with this huge smile. And he understands again that he's been accepted, that he's a part of that family, I go back to Romans 8:15. You did not receive the spirit of slavery to fall back into fear. You don't have to be afraid that he's going to throw you out. He's going to make you pay. But you have received the spirit of adoption as sons by whom we cry, Abba, Father. I'll finish with this last illustration. Reader's Digest writes, this young mother writes in, she said, I stayed with my parents for several days after the birth of our first child. One afternoon, I remarked to my mother that it was surprising that our baby had dark hair, since both my husband and I are fair. And my mom says to me, well, your daddy, Grandpa, has black hair. And I reply to my mom and says, Mom, it doesn't matter. I'm adopted. That wouldn't matter. With an embarrassed smile, my mom said the most wonderful words I've ever heard. She said, oh, I always forget. I always forget because you're mine. And that's the kind of adoption that's been given to us, folks. Where he takes us in. Says, oh, I forget that you're adopted. You're mine. Doesn't matter where you came from. I took you in. You're mine now. Can we come before the Lord now? Can we stand for prayer? Joseph was chosen to be a protector and a provider and an adopter. Men, that is what we are called to do as well. Can we come before the Lord now and first of all thank him for the adoption that we have today? Thank him for the love, the undeserved grace that we've received. And may the Lord speak into your hearts how you can also impact others perhaps through this process. We have people that are members of this church that are Lydia Super, that's a lawyer that does this kind of stuff, that helps with adoption as well. But first of all, let's just come before the Lord and thank him for our adoption. We'll just take a moment of just silent prayer right now before our God. Father, I just thank you again now that you chose me. Not because of anything that I did, not because of anything that I deserved, but you chose me and you adopted me. Through this illustration in Joseph, who had to step in and adopt the Son of God into his family to become the provider, the protector, to become the father figure there. Father, through that we also see how you take care of us and how we must act towards our families and towards the fatherless in this world. This man, this blue-collar guy who we so often forget played such an important part. You chose him specifically for that, and yet so many men here today must play the exact same part in their families. Father, I just pray a blessing on the fathers here, on the moms here that also have to step in and fill some big shoes sometimes. Dad, I just pray for our families here that we can take this example into our lives, into our hearts, how we treat our kids. And again, we just thank you that you give us the mercy of being called your children, to be fathered by this amazing God, amazing Father, which we can call Daddy, and just receive your love and be loved by you. Thank you, Father. Amen.